Tonight we introduce a new weekly live interview segment with Charles Christian called Community Conversations. His guest this evening is Mayor Bill McMurray, and he's joining us live here in the studio. Charles?
Well, Mayor, thanks for joining us tonight, and we're near the end of your tenure, about a month away, right, from your service as mayor. And so I want to ask you to start with, to let our folks know, you had a background in music, you have a background in business, and then you decided to run for mayor. What prompted that? What drew you to that particular moment?
Well, I was public administrator for 10 years.
Right.
And so when I retired from that, someone called me and said, you ought to run for mayor. And I said, well, okay. I thought I might run for council, but just for fun.
Yeah.
But I ran for mayor, and by 371 votes, I was elected.
Well, there you go. Well, that's good. Well, now in this system, it's sort of a council-driven system rather than what would be called a mayor or mayor-driven system. What are some of the the good and bad of that kind of system? Because the mayor, I think many people may think, well, the mayor is in charge of the whole thing, but you're a part of a council.
Well, it's like a board of directors. I would be the chair of the board, and the council's the board. And then the city manager is actually the agency executive who carries out the policies that the council develops, along with the city staff. Okay.
Well, then, speaking of city manager, the city manager, we've had quite a turntable of city managers here in the last few years. What do you think is the reason? Why is it difficult to keep a city manager here in St. Joe?
It's a difficult job, for one thing, and the turnover actually, when I say, rather glibly say we've had 4 city managers, well, we've actually, 2 of those were interims, and they're both still employed with the city. The most recent interim was actually hired as city manager. So when you look at it that way, it hasn't been quite the turnover, although we did have the one gentleman who was here for 9 weeks. So that was a short tenure, and I think maybe several reasons contributed to his early departure, and I certainly wished him well and said, I'll even write you a reference if you need one. So,
what are the challenges of this system in regard to decision making? Sometimes the council and the mayor gets criticized for maybe a slower turnaround in regard to big decisions, even during COVID-19. Is that a drawback of the council-driven system, or are there good things that we should know about that?
Well, no, I think, many hands make light work, and I think it's good to have 9 people representing the citizens. They are the 9 people who are elected, and, they, with the city staff, help develop where the city's going. And we certainly listen to what people say. And, during the COVID, the 2 years of COVID, which we're about 1 year away from when the mask came off, so we can celebrate that anniversary. But it's a difficult thing to do, and I'm glad we have 9 people that can discuss it.
Okay. Any regrets on that situation? I mean, a lot of folks on the national level and on the state level have spoken in recent days, in fact in recent weeks coming up on the anniversary, about the good things and the regrets they have in regard to how COVID-19, once it really hit, was handled. Do you have any regrets on that? Do you have any positives about that in your experience?
The only regret I really have is that we don't have more people vaccinated, but we are doing very well with COVID right now, fewer than 10 people in the hospital. It wasn't too long ago that we had 5 or 6 times that many people in the hospital. And we've also, the number of cases, the rising of the cases, we now have a negative line going down on COVID. So I'm very happy. Keep your fingers crossed. I hope that I hope we continue to be lucky when the BA2 starts entering our city.
That is a concern. And looking back, are there some things in hindsight that you look back on? I know you've had these challenges, economic challenges and COVID challenges, but are there things you look back on and kind of smile before you go to sleep at night and say, I think that's a positive thing that as mayor and as council we were able to do? Give me a couple of those.
Well, I'm really delighted, and I'm sure in the campaign you've heard this, that the citizens stepped up in the middle of a pandemic and passed not 1 but 2 taxes, the bonds for bridges, property tax, and then the sales tax for the parks improvements. And together that's 50 or 60 million on the parks and 20 million on the bridges. And when we first took office, before the pandemic, everybody remember back then, I mean before the pandemic, the CIP tax passed, and that that's just remarkable. The citizens here are stepping up and investing in themselves, and couldn't be prouder of you, St. Joe. You've done a great job.
What are your hopes for that? I know there's an ongoing work, there's continued conversation about infrastructure, continuing conversation about how money is spent, and so what do you hope for your successor, and what do you hope in the next 4 or 5 years will happen with some of those investments, and how they'll sort of pan out, and how will you encourage your successor to do that?
Well, anybody who steps up and runs for public office, they have my admiration. It's a difficult job, and so I will do all I can to encourage them. But we have a lot, the King Hill, the 22nd Street, the Lover's Lane, the 11th Street, the 13th Street, all these bridges, some of which were 100 years old, are being repaired and replaced. And then the Parks for Life, 50 to 60 million, they're like 80 projects. 80 plus projects on that, and I will do all I can to encourage the next council and the mayor, and I'm not going to be one of these ex-council members that comes there with with some hardballs. I'm going to encourage them and tell them they're doing a good job. As I've said before, just as Bill Faulkner has been very great to encourage me in my 4 years.
Great. A couple more things. So in 4 years from now, what do you hope the city looks like? In what ways do you hope that it's changed to attract more business, to kind of clean up downtown, to help with our infrastructure? What are some goals you have in mind based on your now service as mayor?
Well, speaking of new jobs and new business, we have $421 million in new capital investment, and I'm reading notes here, and 590 projected new jobs, and that's before some of the recent things, most notably the hotel, which we're voting on at the next council meeting. The various tax incentives that the developer is going to spend $27 to $29 million, and we have some tax incentives to help them get through that and get that hotel going. So that's another thing to add on to that. I hope the new council follows through on that and does as well. I mean, we appreciate the chamber and all they've done to help us get all those new jobs and that capital investment.
Okay. All right. Well, Mayor, thank you very much for your time here.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us for this community conversation. And I'm Charles Christian. We'll be back here with more news after the break. Thanks, Mayor. Good night.
You're welcome.